And we're live with episode 16 of a podcast for all seasons. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to be talking about some recent comic book developments, a little bit of pish posh, a mishmash, if you will, smorgasbord of stuff today. Not a huge litany of information coming off of new movies and things like that. We've got a bit of information recently as far as movie release dates and things like that. We're going to talk about that at another show. I'm going to let Eric take over and kind of tell us what specifically we're going to be talking about today. And Eric, what's going on?
Hi, Josh, and hi to all our listeners. This is Eric Joseph from DarkKnightNews.com, ComicBookMovie.com, and Multiverse Entertainment. As Josh said, despite whatever movie release dates and whatnot have been released throughout this week, we're going to wait until after San Diego Comic-Con because we will likely have more specifics to talk about, and we don't want to just spend an hour fully speculating on that. So that's probably what you can look forward to in our next episode. But you may notice that Sarah Michelle is not joining us for this episode. We had a scheduling conflict, so hopefully we will have her back on in August sometime. We do have another special guest, at least one more, joining us some point in August, so you can look forward to some guest appearances, which we haven't done on the show in several months. And our main topic for today is going to be some recent Marvel comic developments of the past week, specifically known as Avengers Now. Not Avengers later, not Avengers next Tuesday, Avengers Now! Oh, that's fantastic. Anyway, now, before I get into all the specifics of it, Josh, if you still have the list pulled up in front of you before you turn it back over to me, please run down the lineup for Avengers Now for our fans.
All right, so first, before I can do that, I need to make a little bit of a lead-in because there's been some recent big changes in some of Marvel's major characters. Most people have heard the news, but if you haven't, Thor is now a woman. That's a big change up. Apparently, Thor, Thor in name, he has lost his worthiness, as it were, to wield Mjolnir, and
Get
so
him
a
some
woman.
Cialis.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Get him some Cialis.
Yeah, he lost his ability to wield the great hammer, and apparently a female is now going to be taking over. It's all a result of their current arc, which is Original Sin, and Thor's not going to be able to pick up the hammer. Female does. She's worthy, and so she is the new Thor. So she's one of the major characters that's going to be in the new Avengers now. The second big change up is Captain America. He is now being taken over by none other than Sam Wilson, aka Falcon. A lot of people had speculated that they were going to have Bucky, aka Winter Soldier, who a lot of people now know from Captain America to the Winter Soldier. They thought that he was going to take over the mantle of Cap as he has in the past, but apparently it's going to be Falcon. They've been teammates for a very long period of time in the comic books, so it does stand to reason. He's the he's the Robin to Captain America's Batman, and so it would make sense that eventually he might take over the mantle. So those are the two big changes that I have to kind of introduce first to give you the idea of it's a very significant departure from your classic Avengers team. But we have a couple others. So the Winter Soldier is in Avengers Now, but he is the Winter Soldier. He's not Captain America 2. We have a couple characters from the group called the Inhumans, which is property that potentially we're going to see during Phase 3 in Marvel's Cinematic Universe. Namely, we have two characters from that group, and it's Medusa and Inferno. I'm not 100% certain about Medusa's powers, but Inferno's speak for themselves. He's like fire-based powers and whatnot. But We also have Angela. She's a character from Image's Spawn that was brought into Marvel a few years back, and it's been revealed that she's Odin's daughter and whatnot. So she's a pretty big powerhouse. And then we have a couple others that are a lot more familiar to the Marvel fans who have been around for a long time. So we have Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, and then Deathlock. So that's the lineup. It's a pretty significant change in the lineup for Avengers based on what they've had for the last few years and some of the it's been always a mishmash kind of a team. They've thrown in a few characters here and there, Wolverine, Spider-Man. I
Hey,
think
Tony
that
Stark.
yeah, Tony Stark is in it. I'm sorry, I skipped over Tony Stark because it was he's the obvious one. Yes, Tony Stark is in the Avengers now. I did forget him, as well as Scarlet Witch. I did forget her as well. So yeah, Tony Stark and Scarlet Witch are going to be in it as well. I think they're really getting things ready and primed for some of the changes that are going to be coming up in upcoming Marvel properties. So Deathlock's on the show now. Doctor Strange is almost definitely getting a movie. Ant-Man is. We have Scarlet Witch is going to be in Avengers now. Winter Soldier's to the forefront. Now that everyone's been introduced to Sam Wilson's Falcon. Scarlet Witch is going to be in Avengers as well. So they're really, I think it's a pretty smart choice as far as synergy is concerned.
So
Mixing things
Quicksilver's
up.
not in?
Quicksilver is not in the group. No, that
Only
is a little.
because he's also in a Fox movie.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but Quicksilver isn't in it, which is a little unusual to not see Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver together, seeing as how they are going to be in the Avengers film, Age of Ultron. But that's Avengers Now. It's pretty interesting. What are your thoughts on this team up, Eric?
Well, I will also run down a few things and pros and cons of some of the new, I guess, generation of some of these characters. Um, these characters will also get solo titles. There's going to be some relaunches this fall. In October, I believe, is when the new Thor series will launch from #1, just titled Thor #1. Jason Aaron, who I believe has been writing the character for a year or two, will remain on the title with the new female Thor. Rick Remender, who I believe has been doing Cap for about a year or so, is going to be writing all new Captain America #1, which I'm pretty sure launches in November. Also November, I believe, is Superior Iron Man #1 by Tom Taylor, who also writes Injustice: Gods Among Us and Earth 2 over at DC. I was initially excited for Superior Iron Man until I saw that they're going to do somewhat of a darker and almost villainous take on Iron Man, and I'm not sure I like that. I mean, maybe I'll read issue #1 and see how it goes. Maybe they're just not giving it the description I like to media, but we'll see. This fall's going to be so huge for comic books as it is, but yeah, maybe I'll give Superior Iron Man a try, like I said. As for the new interpretations of these characters, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have a female Thor, and I don't mean to sound misogynist, but there are women who are for and against it. I've heard varying opinions, but it's just kind of odd to call someone else Thor because it's not a superhero code name. That's Thor's birth name, and he's still around, so are they going to call him Thor too? I mean, he's depowered, he looks a little raggedy, he's carrying a battle axe, well, assumedly somewhat depowered, and then this new girl, whatever her real name may be, is carrying around Mjolnir. And then, as for my opinion on Sam Wilson as the new Cap, I don't think it's a totally bad move. I think it's kind of cool to make superheroes generational at some point, let someone else take up the mantle. But at the same time, you kind of referred to Falcon as Cap's Robin. I believe Falcon's been around since maybe the 1970s. I would more so see Bucky as his Robin. Falcon is more so, I'd say, a supporting character to Cap, not a sidekick. But I view him as his own man, which is why with him recently getting more pop culture exposure, being a main member of the team on the cartoon Avengers Assemble. Now he's kind of, some saw him as a breakout character in the Winter Soldier movie, and some people are getting Falcon fever. People are liking him as the Falcon, so is it really the right move to just make him Captain America? And how this will reflect on future movies, uh, I really do not hope this means we're not going to see Bucky as as Captain America in a future film, because they've obviously started planting the seeds for it. He's, I believe, yeah, he's been in 2 films so far of a 9-picture deal. So Chris Evans had a 6-picture deal. Sebastian Stan had a 9-picture deal. So that means they obviously probably had plans for Bucky to become Captain America. So I hope that doesn't get derailed, because they're now going to say, oh, we're going to make Sam Wilson Captain America in a future film. As we know, Marvel Comics really try to align themselves with the movies, but we still don't know if it's going to be true on the flip side, if the movies will try to mirror latest developments in comics. That's also assuming Sam Wilson will be Cap a year from now. Steve Rogers, of course, has been recently depowered and is now showing his age, therefore he can't be running around with Cap. But also, Sam Wilson isn't as physically powerful as Steve Rogers or Bucky Barnes, but we'll see how it goes. It could turn out very well. I know Rick Remender is a well-liked writer in the comics industry, even though a lot of people do give him shit for creative choices he makes. But when we're looking at how it also may affect future films, like, regardless if Bucky or Sam Wilson become the next Captain America, that solves the problem that you don't have to recast Steve Rogers. You've just got another built-in character that can step up after Avengers 3, assumedly, because if our listeners weren't familiar, Chris Evans has 2 more films on his deal, which would likely be Captain America 3 and Avengers 3. Likewise, on the Thor side of things, Chris Hemsworth would have 2 more films on his plate with Thor 3 and Avengers 3. Now, Nikki Fink, formerly of Deadline, I don't know if I told you about this, Josh, but she's the same one that broke the scoop of that slate of DC films that's supposedly supposed to be unveiled at San Diego Comic-Con next week. So in a week, we'll know if that panned out. But she said there's word that Chris Hemsworth is tired of superhero workout regimens and is looking to leave the role of Thor after Avengers 2. That could be true. I know, despite the fact these actors look like they're in good shape a lot of the time, you really do have to step up your game when you're doing a superhero film. Not to get sidetracked too much, but when Ryan Reynolds was doing Green Lantern, he said it kind of sucked because he was in New Orleans and he's around all this great food, but he can't eat any of it because his physique had to look immaculate for filming, so he was pretty much reduced to eating drywall and wood chips, is what he said. But I don't think it's wise, nor do I necessarily think Chris Hemsworth is going to leave until after Avengers 3, because also the simple fact that we have a plot thread hanging in the Thor solo films, what's happening with Loki on the throne in Asgard posing as Odin. So I think they really need to wrap up that thread instead of just focusing on a female Thor. Now, bringing in the female Thor, of course, they have to somewhat do a storyline with Thor either being unworthy or giving up his mantle somehow. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly like the comics, but there has to be a storyline reason for the female Thor to be brought into films. As I said, it solves the problem of having to recast Thor in a role, because people do get attached to actors, but I don't know. Some people might just want to see that character and see him recast. even though I think he's probably a little bit smaller, you could easily get his brother Liam Hemsworth, who looks a lot like him, to step up and take that role. Well, we've still got until 2018, 2019 before we really know what's going on and if these new interpretations of the characters catch on with fans. But I'm sure they're having these discussions in Marvel Comics and at Marvel Studios. But before I turn it back to you, Josh, how they broke this news. They broke the news of a female Thor on The View and the news of a black Captain America on Stephen Colbert. Now I understand that they've made previous announcements concerning Captain America on Colbert's show before, but it kind of looked like they were going out of their way to go on these mainstream shows that are likely primarily watched by people who don't give a shit about comic books. They might watch the superhero movies, but how many of these people actually read the comic books and are going to say, oh, I've got to go pick up Thor now because I can relate to it because it's a female? Um, it kind of feels like in your face PR tokenism, and I don't mean for that to be taken out of context, but there are a lot of discussions within the comic book community about should we change existing characters' ethnicity or sexuality instead of bringing in new characters that are more dynamic, or bringing in characters that are working their way up through the ranks and have become A-listers. One example we talked about, Cyborg, a character who's been around for decades. You know, he was kind of like a B-list hero in the Teen Titans. Then he started to get more popular over the years. You had the Teen Titans animated series. He had some appearances on Smallville. And with the New 52, they decided to make him a member of the Justice League out of the gate in this continuity, instead of saying, oh, he came from Teen Titans and went to the Justice League. And now he's been in Justice League animated movies as a member of the team. He's about to make a cameo in Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice with an expanded role in the future Justice League movie. Cyborg's a character that many fans love, and if you just give them the right writer, they can become A-listers. I wouldn't doubt it if Cyborg will soon get his own solo title in the near future. But yeah, it just matters how you push a character. I mean, to kind of use a a pro wrestling term, excuse me, but you don't necessarily have to make the changes to what's established, because like I said before, it's cool to make things generational, but when characters have been around and for decades, like people bitched even when Dick Grayson became Robin a few years ago, and the few years that Robin was, Batman, sorry, Dick Grayson, when Bruce Wayne was dead, quote unquote. I really liked the few years that Dick Grayson was Batman, and people are like, oh, only Bruce Wayne can be Batman. But when a character's been around for 75 years, sometimes it's necessary to change up the status quo and get some fresh storytelling. And I'm sure that Remender could tell some great stories with Sam Wilson, and Aaron might tell some good stories with the female Thor, but to not to sound redundant, but I think maybe the time was right for a Falcon solo ongoing for him, if he's really starting to catch on in the mainstream, and really, because despite the announcement on Colbert, I mean, the stories ignited a brush fire online. It's certainly gotten attention, but if you're trying to get casual moviegoers to read comic books, then people are like, oh, I don't know this Falcon guy. Maybe if you had a new Falcon series and they see Falcon on the cover, maybe that would have provided people more incentive. What do you think of all these new developments, Josh?
I I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, and Eric mentioned specifically a conversation that we had had where I do think that there's quite a bit of tokenism going on, and I don't say that in a negative way, but when Stephen Colbert, I mean, obviously he's known as a comedy personality, and he's known as kind of a pseudo conservative and whatnot, and he's playing the whole idea of conservatism as a joke. And there's in that very nature there's a little bit of this tongue-in-cheek talking that goes on in the things that he says. And when he introduced the fact that Sam Wilson was going to be Captain America, he introduced him as Captain African America. I mean, and that should tell you everything that you need to know, because he's saying it right there. He's saying it blatantly, that it's like, ha ha ha, we got a African American as Captain America now, and hey, Captain African American is right there in the title. But it's on everyone's mind in that it's like, oh, you're just making Captain America a black guy. I think that what Eric said was poignant in that he's his own man. Maybe I misspoke in terms of saying that. Yeah, I know that Bucky originally started out with Captain America, and he's a little bit more in the Robin role. I would say that maybe even Sam Wilson's Falcon is more of a supplementary hero to Captain America, a la maybe Huntress to Batman, or some of the other non necessarily sidekicks that have teamed up with him to fight crime. That's kind of Sam Wilson's role in Captain America's world, and also he has been his own man. So essentially, having him just take on the mantle of Captain America is a little bit of an odd choice. Yes, it had to happen with what's going on with the Captain America character, but I think that the transition was people really expected Bucky to take over Captain America. He had a very successful run in Captain America where he was, Winter Soldier as Captain America too. People really liked it. Some people liked it more than they liked Captain America in a long time. So it's just a little bit of an odd choice. And then the fact that you have, now a female Thor, they're introducing the character of, well, not introducing, but they're bringing in the character of Angela into this continuity. And she's Odin's daughter. She is female and she's Asgardian, because it kind of feels redundant. Feels like we're doing double duty, to make Thor a female. And the fact that they were kind of, I'm going to just use the word pandering on the View to, hey, look at comics can be progressive, and we can have gender bending roles in comic books. It's not just happening on television and movies. It just seems like pandering, and the fact that they would release it on like a show that I guarantee no women who watch that show are avid comic book readers. I mean, by all means, please post something in the comments if you're the 0.01% of female view watchers who read comic books. Let us know that I'm wrong, but I find it very hard to believe. Another thing that Eric mentioned is that they're they're releasing this information in these big outlets, these big social outlets, in this case television shows that are quite popular. Um, Stephen Colbert, the Robert Report, I believe, is the name of the show. It's a very popular show. The View is popular for daytime cinema as far as shows that are geared towards women go. So I guess I could see them making maybe mentioning it on the show, but like having almost an exclusive announcement on the show specifically is a little bit unusual. Um, I do think that it's pandering, and it doesn't mean that it can't be good. I think that making, say, Dick Grayson Batman, some people liked it, some people didn't. Some people thought it was a natural progression. I was kind of one of those people. I thought that it made sense to bring that in. So maybe this is kind of the natural progression for the Captain America character to have his mantle passed on. I just do think it's a little bit of an odd choice that it's Sam Wilson. And if he is getting so popular as Falcon, then yeah, make him stand out as Falcon. Make him stand out as this unique character that is distinctly his and has been his since time memorial. The only other thing that I was going to mention, and it's kind of off of the topic of what we were talking about, was the interesting thing is they did just specifically mention that Sam Wilson will be flying as Captain America. So we were talking about him not having as high of a power level as Bucky or as Steve Rogers. it is interesting that that'll add a kind of interesting new dynamic to the character of Captain America. I mean, everyone who saw the movie Captain America 2 Winter Soldier saw how badass Sam Wilson was when he has the wings. I mean, you have quite a bit of a arsenal in your pouch if you have the ability to fly in a place where people don't either a expect you or just aren't traditionally going to be able to attack you, and now you have that ability in someone who has Cap's shield. It's an interesting thing. I guess we'll have to see if he's using guns like Winter Soldier, as well as Captain America when he played Captain America in the comic books. He was packing some heat, which is an untraditional thing for Captain America. He's usually not using guns, he's usually using the shield. But this suit's pretty interesting. I mean, that's really the only other thing that I have to say. It's kind of an amalgamation of some of his modern Falcon suit as well as the most modern Captain America suit, which looks like it's pulled straight out of the Winter Soldier movie. But that's pretty much all I got to say about that. Why don't we switch up our topic here? What did you want to hit up next, Eric?
We'll talk a bit about the attempted acquisition this week. You may have heard that Fox Broadcasting, or I should say Fox as the corporation owned by Rupert Murdoch, wanted to purchase Time Warner for, I believe, $80 billion, and they were turned down. And some analysts are saying this won't be their last attempt. But as you know, Time Warner owns Warner Brothers and various other television networks, and that includes DC Comics. So if Fox bought them, they would own DC, and I don't think it would be as hands-on as some people think. Like Rupert Murdoch would make creative decisions for DC Comics, which is quite a ridiculous notion to think that he would oversee creative decisions in the funny books, as some call them. But what it would do, if we're looking at properties they own for movies, it would allow the possibility of a Justice League X-Men crossover film. Because, of course, Fox has the cinematic rights to X-Men and Fantastic Four. Of course, Marvel Disney has X-Men and Fantastic Four in comic books and animation. But if this were to happen, you'd have to think that over at Marvel and Disney, they would be shitting a brick. I think you might see less of a push for X-Men comic books if that were to happen, but it's kind of funny how everyone is wanting Wolverine to be in an Avengers film because he's been a member of the team in the comics, and maybe one day Disney and Fox could work out the agreement, but it'd be funny if it actually worked out to where you saw Wolverine and Batman in a movie. Maybe some lawyers would try to get involved, but I think it would be within the realm of possibility if the companies merge. I did see a funny comment from some fan on a Facebook page saying he would stop reading DC Comics because Fox ruins everything. So I think he somehow thinks that Bryan Singer or people who have directed films at Fox Motion Picture Studios would be writing DC comic books, which isn't the case. I don't know. Other people would probably think it's funny if they break that down in a logical manner as well. There's not too much to talk about here from an editorial perspective other than what we've said, how cool it would be to see a Justice League X-Men team up in the future. But if any more developments come in the future, we'll certainly talk about this more. But you have anything else to add about this topic, Josh?
First things first, it's pretty huge. I mean, I was like, I saw the story and I kind of saw, I think it might have even been your post, is this idea that, hey, could a Justice League X-Men movie happen? I was like, of course not. There's no way in hell it'll ever happen until I read the potential acquisition by Fox of Time Warner. I mean, that has some huge, broad, sweeping implications. And, I mean, this
Highest
is getting
box
off the.
office return ever.
It would be insane. It would be absolutely crazy. This is kind of a little bit off topic, but recently Time Warner merged with, I think, was it Comcast, or they merged with some other um, major distributor of media.
I
And
think it might have been Comcast purchased Time Warner Cable or something like that.
okay, okay. See, I mean, this is a little bit beyond our purview of the topic, obviously, and it's also a little bit beyond our knowledge base as far as what that would mean. But I mean, that's a pretty interesting thing. But these kind of mergers do happen fairly regularly recently, and people are kind of saying, hey, this is essentially, monopolization in terms of cable distribution because people see it as a commodity. But when we get into movies and we get into properties that are not commodities, it's no holds barred and it's anything goes. So the possibility that this could happen is realistic. It's pretty interesting that I haven't really seen a whole lot of stories about it online. I'm not even so. I mean, that's the type of story that you would expect to see on like Yahoo's main news page, or MSN, or whoever your main source of popular news is. Those are the types of stories you expect to see on page one, or at least in their financials section. And I haven't really seen a whole lot in that vein, but it would be insane. I mean, first things first, we got to get a Justice League movie off the ground before that can happen. But we know that it's coming, and it's going to happen. Yeah, if we could then take an X-Men, a cast of X-Men First Class, merge it with the new fresh Justice League. I mean, it just be that I don't care if you're a Marvel fanboy or a DC fanboy. That is the movie of movies. Like that is the other than an Avengers slash DC Justice League crossover, there is no bigger properties that could meet in terms of large teams of superheroes. It would be so insane. I don't even know if they could fund that movie, simply because the amount of money that would be spent on that cast alone would be outrageous. I mean, think about it now. You'd have Henry Cavill, Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, Jesse Eisenberg potentially, and then yeah, Hugh Jackman, and all of the McAvoy. Who else? I mean, dear Lord, the list goes on and on. I can't even think of all the names because the concept is hilarious and awesome at the same time. I don't necessarily hope it would happen, and here's why. Um, I don't want now again, this goes beyond the purview of what we talk about on the show, but would it mean that DC proper, aka DC Comics properties, would essentially be affected by a buyout of Time Warner? Because does Time Warner own Warner Brothers, who owns DC Comics? Would that affect the way that DC Comics are written? Hopefully not, and I don't think that it would, but it's a pretty scary perspective, and it's a pretty scary thought. But in terms of just pure fanboy service and hopefulness, yeah, come on, it's Justice League and X-Men in the same friggin' movie. That'd be the coolest thing on the planet. Forget Avengers 2. I mean, I would still go see Avengers 2, but there would be people. It would be the true blockbuster again. There'd be people lined up around the block. There's just no question about it. That's my final take on that subject. But how about we had some con information we were gonna mention, Eric. You want to start up the talk on that?
Yeah, anyone who's listened to our previous episode, I'm not going to reiterate all of it, but for people who like to attend conventions in the Metro Detroit area, we did say that Detroit Fan Fair has been delayed from October 2014 to February 2015. And we were wondering what would fill our con void for the fall. Of course, you have the anime-centric YumaCon, late October, early November, but we don't know if that's necessarily appealing to guys like us. I was discussing I might go for one day at YumaCon if I get a press pass or something. Uh, but Great Lakes Comic Con, which is an up and coming show here in the area, they are doing a weekend October 17th and 18th at Macomb Community College. Now, they haven't announced any guests yet, but I've seen shows information for shows they've done through Facebook and such. And it's not a big show, but it's probably going to grow slowly over the years. And they do get probably about less than 10 uh, names in the comic book industry as guests. They don't get media guests, at least not yet. But I believe admission for these shows, they haven't set the price for this show specifically, but if history repeats itself, their admission is $3 at the door, 5 for early birds who want to get in earlier in the day, and then cosplayers get in for free. But yeah, look it up. It's Great Lakes Comic Con, October 17th and 18th. Uh, Josh and I may go depending on what announcements they make for guests. It would be cool if they get some decently big names in the industry, and mostly I've seen it's some names of yesteryear. So you can get some older comics signed, but you also want to see some of the current names too. And then the organizers of Motor City, the convention's escaping me, right? Motor City Nightmares. They're now doing a pop culture convention called Motor City MegaCon. They haven't set a date yet. If it's this year, it's going to be Thanksgiving weekend at the Sheraton Hotel in Novi, Michigan. It's also possible they're going to do it early next year, but we'll bring you the latest as it develops. But yeah, they're dubbing it as a pop culture convention, so it's possible that there's going to be some focus on comic books, but I'm guessing this is going to be one that's more heavy on media guests. But this does also sound like it will be a rather fun convention to go to. And adding this to the already existing Motor City Comic Con and Detroit Fan Fair, our guys like us in Detroit are finally getting more due, and we don't have to be as jealous of people in California who have a convention to go to every month out of the year. And hopefully, what I would like to see happen is Wizard World is expanding its market into other cities soon. Detroit's not on the list yet, but I certainly hope that they do bring it here in the near future. What do you think about all the latest con developments, Josh?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like Eric said, if you're a local, like Metro Detroit area or even Michigan centric, then we don't have a whole lot in the way of major cons, and unless you have the funds and the time to go to, say, Chicago's WonderCon or some of the larger cons in major cities around here. I know that there's ones in Cleveland. I know that there's some in as far as Lexington and things like that. Places that they're a little bit out of the budget range of your average comic book reader, and unless you have the again time and the money to spend on those things, having local cons is really the only way that guys and girls can really get to meet some of their comic book writers and artists and sometimes media guests. So it's kind of interesting that they're finally bringing in a few more cons here and there. Eric mentioned the Great Lakes Comic Con. I can't really find a whole lot in the way of who's going to be guesting, and as far as Mega City MegaCon,
Motor City MegaCon.
I'm sorry, what did I say? Mega City?
Yeah.
Apparently, yes, Mega City. We've moved into Judge Dredd territory. Yes, Motor City at MegaCon, as I get a slip of the tongue. It's pretty interesting, and with Fanfare being delayed until February, hopefully they'll do it in the fall, which they are, September 11th through 13th. We were hoping that they finally named the dates.
They did?
They did, but it's 2015, and that is the first. Yeah, that is the first MegaCon. So we did get fall, but unfortunately we did not get fall of this year. And
well, it's still something to go to.
Yeah, it'll still be something to go to. If the Detroit Fan Fair gets back to its normal around October date, it'll be cool because we'll have a couple cons to go to in a few months. There is also one in November, which is the Grand Rapids Comic Con. I don't know if that's its official name, but that's where the con takes place. And they have at least a few popular media guests. I don't know all of them, but I do know that Nichelle Nichols from Star Trek fame, she played Uhura in Star Trek original series, is going to be there. I'd really like to get out there and try to meet her, get something signed. I'm a big Star Trek fan, but it's awesome. Like I said, if you're a local person who wants to do some cons, there's quite a bit more than there used to be. I'd say definitely look online for local cons. You're always going to find some smaller ones. There are ones that we didn't mention here that I know Eric's gone to that are really, really, really small cons that are just comic book artists, no media guests and things like that. And if you're truly into just comics, then it's right up your alley. Sometimes the media guests kind of get in the way of enjoying some of just the comic book aspects of it. But it is fun to meet people who are, playing your favorite characters on television in, say, TV's Arrow or which we met a couple of those people at Motor City Comic Con. So it's awesome. I mean, the more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. As long as we're not getting one every single month where it's like, hey, I cannot spend the money to go to this con. I think it'll be all right. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. What else did you want to speak about? I know we wanted to talk new comics, and I'm not exactly chomping into bit, but there's quite a bit of comic books I've been reading lately. So
Yeah, before I get into new comics, I'll just do a side note. When you said smaller conventions, they tend to do it maybe once a month. I mean, not every month out of the year, but it's the same organizers that do Motor City Comic Con. It's called Extravcon. It's in Livonia, Michigan, at the Knights of Columbus Hall, like around Farmington, between 7 and 8 Mile. Yeah, it's just vendors, and it's a good place to buy comic books and collectibles. But yeah, no guests. It's just a little thing to get into, $3. But if you're looking for something to do on a Sunday afternoon, whenever, I think the next one is in August sometime. Hopefully they update their website soon because the date isn't listed as of the time I'm talking about it. But as for the latest comic books, what I physically picked up at my shop this week, I got Robin Rises Omega #1, which is kicking off the Robin Rises arc that will spill over into Batman and Robin the monthly, and then tie up this December in Robin Rises Alpha #2. It was a pretty good read. It wasn't perfect. There was a good amount of catch up for it in case you're a reader that's not totally familiar with Damian Wayne and how we got to this point, but it has me excited for this arc. Andy Kubert provided the artwork, which was pretty good as usual, and then we had Peter Tomasi writing, who is, of course, the regular writer for Batman and Robin. I picked up Batman Eternal #15, which is kind of starting a new arc in that title. It was probably my least favorite issue of Batman Eternal to date. The title has been on fire for the last few weeks, and they tied up the whole, well, at least a good amount of it, the whole gang war with Carmine Falcone, and we learned that Jason Bard, who kind of looked like the spiritual successor to Commissioner Gordon, is not as pristine as Gordon is when it comes to a moral standpoint, and Batman is now a little hesitant. But they had this great urban gritty crime drama, and then this week it was just loaded with too many characters, and even one of the characters said something about it. Might have been Batwoman, like, oh, like we really needed one more person to join the show. It was just too much in this issue, and then they kind of shifted into this supernatural drama, which I know they've planted some seeds with the Spectre, but I don't know. It's just all the supernatural aspects just seem so out of place. And while I don't mind Batman in sci-fi settings, because of course I write them in the Justice League, I'm not someone who's into like magic and fantasy. I mean, of course, I'm going to give the Constantine show a try, but I don't know. It's just when we get into like Etrigan and Hellfire and whatever's going on under Arkham, I just think it just meshes in an odd way, and maybe it'll all come together because Batman Eternal is, going to be maybe 52 issues or something, and we're only 15 issues in. But it was all this issue was really a hodgepodge, and maybe they were trying to catch up so they can get some of these lesser arcs on point with the major dots to be connected as we move forward. But one thing I thought was funny is that Jason Bard made like maybe a 1 or 2 page appearance in this issue, and then Batman shows up, shakes his hand, and says "good work." Like the stuff in the last issue never even happened. I just thought it wasn't good coordination between the writing team on this title. And then I also picked up Teen Titans #1, the Batman 75 variant cover. I might not stay on for the title because it's one more title to buy each month, and as anyone knows, comic books add up. But I decided to give it a try, and it was a pretty good issue. Maybe a little too much dialogue. Will Pfeiffer did a decent job finding the voice of the characters, and of course you had Kenneth Rocafort on art. I mean, the guy's a beast when it comes to drawing. I kind of think that there are certain artists at DC that are very good. You've got the great detailed ones like Fabok, Finch, Tony Daniel. You've got Dustin Nguyen, who's a great noirish, cartoonish style artist. And then you've got these guys like, let's say, Rocafort or Francis Manapul, who really, their artwork has its own fingerprint, if you know what I mean. And it's just so beautiful to look at. And even if just plop down $2.99 to pick up Teen Titans #1. If you were a fan of Young Justice, the cartoon series, you might like the way this book feels. It's kind of a similar tone. I know the previous Teen Titans series from Scott Lobdell wasn't very well received, so like I said, new creative team, at least give this one a chance, at least for maybe 1 or 2 issues. And on the review side of things, you can read my latest graphic novel review. It's a featured article over at darknightnews.com for Nightwing Volume 4 Second City. That was a pretty good trade, so I recommend reading the trade and reading my review, obviously, because I recommend reading anything that I write. And I do have another trade review coming this Tuesday on Dark Knight News. Of course, embargo, I can't quite spoil what it is, but it's obviously a Batman-related book. And it's one that I did enjoy. So, yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that. And don't forget, folks, this Wednesday, July 23rd, participating comic shops. I know my shop, Back to the Past, in Redford, Michigan, is participating. And then Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, some other bookstore are supposed to be selling the promo or giving away the promo items, and participating libraries. Yeah, Batman's 75th anniversary is being celebrated by DC Comics this week. They have a special free edition of Detective Comics #27 that you can pick up. It's got the original Case of the Chemical Syndicate from Bob Kane and Bill Finger in it, and then we have some stories that were included in the new 52 Detective 27, specifically the retelling of that from Brad Meltzer and Brian Hitch, and then the story, the 27, I believe that's what it was called, from Scott Snyder and Sean Murphy, and then a preview of some new story that harkens back to the original tale from Brad Meltzer and Chip Kidd, and then they're going to have like masks, a cape, probably bookmarks and stuff. So if you're a Batman fan, yeah, definitely get out and get some free stuff this week. Josh, what were some of the comics you had to talk about?
Oh, well, you know specifically that I typically like to marathon books, almost like I marathon shows. So sometimes I might go a few months without reading a specific book while I'm catching up on something else, and then I'll dig in and I'll read a lot. So actually, I've read a couple issues of Eternal, but I've actually been stacking up a bunch of those to try to just bust a bunch out at the same time. I just prefer to read things that way, but as far as what I have been reading recently, I've been catching up on all of the Superman titles and tie-ins for the Superman Doomed arc. The last one that I had read was Superman Wonder Woman number 10, I believe, which was, as you had said, was not a fantastic book. It's probably the weakest issue of that comic that I've read. Unfortunately, Tony Daniel was off of art on the interiors, even though he did the awesome cover. Um, he will definitely be missed on that book. There's no question about it. It definitely his style complements the book well enough that even if the story was not fantastic, I think I'd still enjoy it more. Obviously, if the art was a little bit better, but I also recently caught up on. I had been saving up some of the Walking Dead books, and they finished their All Out War story finally, and now they're into a couple issues of their newest arc, which the name is escaping me. I can tell you in about 2 seconds here. The arc is, I believe, simply just titled like A Brand New Day or something like that. But it's one of those things where they had a really distinct and unique and large story arc, and I think people really expected the status quo to change, i.e., that is to say, they thought that the major character of Rick Grimes was potentially going to die, or at the very least, that the large villain of the story, Negan, was going to die. And I won't spoil as far as what transpired, but neither of those things happen. And I can tell, they have a section at the back of the book which is something I miss from a lot of DC titles. It's letter hacks. It's basically, right into the writer and the artist, and say your piece and what you thought about the books. And it's kind of like the comments section, only usually there's a whole lot less trolling that goes on in those. Although there is a bit that happens, but Robert Kirkman, if anyone knows anything about that guy who writes The Walking Dead, he does not tolerate trolling, and he'll just rip someone to pieces in the comments, which is somewhat funny. But it seemed like people were in my same mentality, that they thought that the books were a little lackluster. They thought that the ending seemed like it did not have a good definitive conclusion, and maybe it's because of the way that it ends. And by the way, the new arc is just simply referred to as a new beginning. It actually is supposed to take place a significant time after the events of All Out War, maybe even up to a year later. But if you like Walking Dead, I definitely suggest checking out the All Out War arc. They bust those trades out really, really quick. I think they're on some ridiculous number, like 27 now or something like that. But if you like the book, it's the biggest thing to happen to that title in some time. The title's kind of waned for me as far as, after the prison incidents, which people know now from the show. After those happened, it was kind of like the series seemed like it was lollygagging along, not really making any significant contributions, and as far as the holy shit factor that comic normally did. People read it and it was like, holy crap! They killed off one major character who had been around since issue 2 during the course of the arc, and that was definitely significant. It was gruesome. It was incredible. It was an issue 100, so it was a big anniversary issue. It upset me that the character died because I cared for that character. I liked that character more than most. But at the end of the day, there just wasn't a whole lot in the end of that story. I think that the implications of what happened in that story are going to be more significant than what actually happened in the story itself. As far as the series going forward, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here. But um, I'd say, as far as the arc is concerned, if I had to give it like a grading, which we typically do, I'd say I'd maybe give it like a 7 out of 10, or maybe even a 6.5. It's definitely worth reading, but it, wait until you can get your hands on it. I wouldn't be spending $8 an issue, because if you want back issues, they go up in price almost immediately because the book's so popular. Wait till the trade comes out, and you can get the entire thing for probably $20. But Doomed, Superman Doomed, pretty awesome. Awesome stuff. Who knows what implications it's going to have? They're building up to a really, really, really big denouement, and hopefully they deliver, unlike The Walking Dead. But that's about all I've been reading lately. And pretty soon I'm going to start into the Batman Eternal as well.
Well, I think that's pretty much going to do it for this episode. As I said at the top of the show, keep your eyes peeled. We will have maybe a guest or two or more in August. Also, be sure to check out our WordPress page at multiverseentertainment.wordpress.com. I will have a picture of the Avengers Now lineup as the featured image with this episode, so you can get a look at. Josh listed them earlier, but if you want to take a look at the artwork, it will be there. And be sure to like us at facebook.com/a podcast for all seasons. Hopefully we'll be back in a week or so for an episode and talk about any major announcements coming out of San Diego Comic-Con. So that's going to do it for me. I'll turn it over to Josh. Thanks for listening again, everybody.
Yeah, I'll leave everyone chomping at the bit with this little bit of information. We decided not to talk about it distinctly because we're going to wait until after San Diego Comic-Con to mention Marvel's release dates, upcoming news, not just make an hour's worth of blatant speculation. One significant thing was El Mayembe had tweeted one single line, 3 words, R.I.P. Sinister Six. Boom. That's a pretty big thing. Who knows what he's talking about? Who knows if any of it has any validity? But we could be talking about some pretty interesting or big comic book news in the next, or rather, comic book movie news in the next week. So we'll talk to you guys next time after the cons dropped, and we've got some really juicy stuff to talk about. Thanks for joining us. Like Eric said, like our page. Check us out on YouTube. You can watch all of our videos on there on my page. And have a good night, guys.